Welcome back to Inside the Issues. I'm Alex Cohen. The group's name was inspired by a Quinnipiac University poll from 2018, which found that 97% of respondents approve of universal background checks. We first spoke with the group's executive director, Mathew Littman, back in June of last year. In light of 25 people killed in mass shootings over the past 8 days here in California, we thought it would be a good time to hear how their work on expanding the conversation has been going. Mathew Littman joins me now in studio. Thank you so much for being with us on this very difficult week.
I wish I could be here under better circumstances.
I know, I really do. And I feel like, you know, when these tragedies happen, we hear this anger, this exasperation, this pain and desperation from people who don't own guns. What I want to hear first from you is, when these mass shootings happen, what do you hear from people who do own guns?
So it's a good question. So from people who do own guns, what we often hear is it's not the gun, it's the person, right? We have to make a difference with people and intervene with people, not necessarily with guns. Now, our focus is on both views, bringing everybody together around these views, as you mentioned, where people agree, universal background checks, for example. But the things where people agree, what we see, Alex, is we don't have those things. They're not, legislation has not been passed on the areas of wide agreement. I think you would agree that thoughts and prayers at this point are not, that's fine to think and to pray, but that's not enough. So what are we going to do that's changing things? Whatever we've been doing so far as a country has not worked.
And I do want to ask about that. But first, I would imagine that gun owners, when a tragedy like this happens, it certainly doesn't make their image look any better, right? Is there an anger and exasperation that, you know, this is what this makes us look like?
I'm exasperated right now even talking about it. You know, gun owners are mostly in the same place as people who do not own guns, right? So, for example, 84% of gun owners favor background checks. You don't see that very often because it's the loudest voices that people pay attention to. So those loudest voices, the 16% who don't favor background checks, they get heard. So what we're trying to do is say, these people who are a little bit quieter, they believe this. We need them to speak up a little bit. And you showed some highlights before, for example, from people who are gun owners, Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, the congressman, Rob Pincus, who does a lot of training for people on guns. But those are the types of people who join with us as we try to bring people together on this issue.
Yeah. As we mentioned, the last time we spoke with you was in June, and this was right after the horrific tragedy in Uvalde, Texas. What sort of progress do you think has been made since that time, in terms of the work that you all have been doing in this country as a whole when it comes to gun control?
So, first of all, there's been progress and there have been steps back. The progress was that legislation was passed after Uvalde in Congress, and from a 97% perspective, you know, we're an LA-based but national organization. So, you know, this was the first time when Congress was holding hearings that they're talking about our research at those hearings. And when the senators are meeting to discuss what they might do, they're talking about our research that we provide to them, so on gun owners and non-gun owners, so that they understand that perspective, and then they can move forward and pass significant legislation. Doesn't solve every problem, but then what happens is you pass that legislation, Supreme Court takes us back another step and makes it much easier for people to carry a gun in places where maybe that wouldn't necessarily be a good idea. And now, you know, for example, in California, we have a lot of gun safety laws. A lot of those laws are not going to last because of what happened at the Supreme Court. So there have been steps forward, but there have been steps backward, major steps backward as well.
Yeah, and it's complicated, right? You and the folks at 97% support laws which keep people at high risk of violence from gaining access to guns. But we've been talking about it this week on the show, and it's complicated because when you look at the overall trend of violence, the people who have mental illness account for just 4%, some studies have found, right? And that's not a lot. It's this kind of needle in a haystack. So what do you think needs to be done in terms of really isolating, okay, if getting guns out of the hands of people who are at high risk is so key, how do you figure out who's high risk?
So there is a way to do this where you would reduce deaths, homicide rates by 28%, suicides by 6.7%. That's a lot. So we did a study with Dr. Michael Siegel at Tufts. He's the #1 guy. He did a big study for us talking to gun owners, non-gun owners, the famous gun safety organizations, gun rights organizations. And he found that, for example, if you do state background checks that are more extensive than federal, and somebody has to get a permit in a state, that's a better background check, more likely. misdemeanor violent crime. So sometimes it could be a felony that's brought down to a misdemeanor. That person has committed a violent crime. That's the type of person who might commit a crime with a gun, but right now that person can get a gun, right? So if you just take those types of things away, red flag laws, which I'm sure you've talked about quite a bit, those are the things that are important that will actually reduce gun violence. So there are ways to do this. So we, for example, we've talked to the president's team, we talked to Republicans and Democrats in Congress, we talk to people in state legislatures, and we say to them, there are ways to do this, to reduce gun violence. But what we find, Alex, often is people are talking past each other. People agree. This is the most important thing I want people to take away is most people, gun owners, agree for the most part with non-gun owners on all of these issues.
Yeah. But, you know, talk about red flag laws and background checks. Doesn't work if you're talking about a 6-year-old. And today, in this week, we've learned that there were multiple warnings about this 6-year-old child who went on to shoot his teacher, and yet no one intervened. I mean, are there just ever moments where you feel like no matter how far we go with this, you know, alliance of gun owners and non-gun owners alike, there's just a deeper lying problem.
Alex, I swear this is true, but today a dog shot a person in a car. The dog stepped on the gun in the car and shot the person who was on ABC News today, right? So you talk about the 6-year-old. We can't solve everything. I wish we could. There are 45,000 deaths a year with guns. 25,000 or so of those are suicides. We can't solve all of those. I wish that we could, but that's just reality. But we can do things that make a difference. And we can step in. Some of these policies that we're talking about on a roadmap would actually make a difference. It's important that we know that this is not a hopeless situation. We can do things. Yeah.
Another thing that we're seeing coming out of the wake of the recent mass shootings here in California is, you know, why is all this cluster of shootings happening? And there are some researchers, including ones at Arizona State University, who study infectious diseases, and they found that mass shootings can almost in a way be contagious. Not the same as copycats, but, you know, there's such an intense media coverage of this. And yet, how could the media not talk about this too? I feel like we can't win either way, and I'm curious.
First of all, I definitely feel that the media should be talking about mass shootings, but I also feel, Alex, that people who commit suicide, which are the vast majority of gun deaths, we don't talk about that enough.
That's true.
Right? And so those are people who, they may be very temporarily going through a very bad situation, depression, whatever it might be, but they have access to a firearm and they use it. And if you try to commit suicide with a gun, you're gonna. And if you try to commit suicide any other way, the odds are you are not going to. So those are 25,000 lives. Often they're veterans, and we don't talk about that enough. So I understand and I appreciate the coverage of these mass shootings because they're horrible and they're people's lives, and you just had on the person from Monterey Park. And it's a very scary situation. But we also need to talk about what's going on a daily basis in this country. Too many lives lost. We need to do something different.
In this country, and we just have about 30 seconds, but I know you just talked to the BBC on this. How does the rest of the world see us on guns right now?
Whenever I do one of those shows, they say they have how do you not have universal background checks? It makes no sense. And I will tell you that as an American, it makes no sense. There are things that we could do that the vast majority of people in this country want to do that will reduce deaths. Again, it won't go from 45,000 to 0, but these are lives. And any lives that we could save, that's worthwhile.
Mathew Littman of the group 97%, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for dropping by. I really appreciate it.